Thank you. All right, so the second part is primarily about hazard analysis. So this is primarily for teams that are in that like advanced to WOW or set place. But there are things that basic or intermediate can do so it can set up future safety captains to be able to do this easily. It's something you'll need a bit of time to set up, but once after that, it's pretty, it helps itself almost with a little bit of maintenance. So we're going to overview it, kind of give you an idea of like, okay, this is what I'd be doing. This is how it works before we get to like the actual spreadsheet and the graphs and all of that, because it can be a little overwhelming to look at that first. So Chris Fishbach might help me out with some of that stuff because I'm not involved with some of the little techniques that she has involved. So she's going to help me out with that. So thank you. So once again, I'm Sarah Schmidt. I'm a safety captain for 4607 CIS. I have been safety captain for the last 2 years. This is my 3rd year in FRC, and we started hazard analysis this spring. It started when I was asking Chris, like, okay, we've done FMEA for our team. I'd like to apply something similar to safety so we can make sure that we are progressing and making sure that we're evolving. And innovation can't happen in isolation. So sometimes we need to ask our mentors for help or adapt other things that are happening in our team. So we started it about 4 or 3 weeks before our first competition. That was week 1. And it was a Great Northern Regional. And it was a lot to do right before a regional because it was before regionals, our busiest time, because we're making sure our 6S is done. We're making sure that everyone who's going knows what they're doing. We're doing last minute training. So I suggest doing it before that time period. So this is a great time period now because like you're about to head into like holiday break. You're going to have some time. So you're going to want to figure out what you want this to do for you. So be sure to ask any questions as we go because this can get confusing. If you have sat through an FMEA presentation of ours, it might look similar in some places, so you can use that knowledge here. So once again, this is our email, questions, concerns, help, whatever. I suggest using this when we're primarily in robo season because it is not used very oftenly in the summer. If you have any questions today, please put it in the chat box below. So this is kind of just like an overview of how this works. So we're going to pretend that little smiley face guy got hurt. So little smiley face guy, he cut himself with a knife because he didn't know how to use it. So the usual course of action is the little smiley face guy will come to us, we'll do first aid, and we'll do a report. And then we'd have corrective action, like, okay, Timmy, you're not going to have access to the knives, or we're going to show you how to use it. So stuff like that. So that was kind of what we had in place before. So injury, report, corrective action. This was also in place for like hazards, safety violations, all of that type of stuff. So now if you go into what we do now, it's little smiley face Timmy gets hurt. We do a report, we do the corrective action, we log it, and then we put it into our hazard analysis, and then we discuss. Do we need a new SOP? Do we need to have additional PPE? Do we need to do new training for this tool, such as a knife? Do we have to have a change in instructions? So like instead of doing it this way, you have to make sure that you're discussing it in a certain way? Or do you need a policy change? Is there something wrong with your manual? Is there a loophole or something like that? So this leads for a broader discussion, and it leads to why is this happening? And so you can pretty much figure out more of the root causes of why people are getting hurt. This is hopefully to help reduce your injuries. So you want to make sure that you're keeping track of this. So this is pretty much a very generalized overview of what normally happens. So this is pretty much just making sure that after the report, it just doesn't sit in a folder, binder, or wherever it's stored and just sits there. You want to make sure that the reports are working for you. So we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about this process, why we do it, and all that stuff. So why do we do it? We want to make sure that we're finding the root cause of all of these injuries and accidents. We want to make sure that we're finding, okay, this is what's happening. We want to make sure that we're having a realistic view of our team. You're also going to make your program safer. So you're going to realize, okay, we need more training here. Or in our case, we realized, oh, we need to have training earlier in the season or something in response to some incidents. So you want to make sure that you're keeping your goals in mind. It also helps you keep track of your past and learn from your mistakes. So talking about like that tribal knowledge, like, okay, I know from the safety captain before me, we can't do X, Y, Z. So I might know that, and that might be a core part of like my knowledge. But the person who replaced interaction with that old safety captain. So you're going to have to make sure that you have a way for them to go back and be like, oh, this is what's happening. You're also going to find out like how effective are your policies really. So you're going to figure out like, okay, some of this policy wording is not working for us, or the way we're implementing it is not working for us. You're going to figure out a lot of how your manual is working for you. Talking about that, you're going to have a good base for your future safety captains. One of the things I stress the most is you're going to want a starting point for the next person. If the next person comes in completely clueless, you have done nothing to support your team in the future. As long as the person that's coming into replacing you has a good idea by the time you leave and has something to go back to, I think you're in a pretty good spot. It's really interesting to go back and look at some of these and see like, okay, this is how they reacted. This is the types of injuries they were dealing with. So going through this process, you might learn a lot about your past safety captains. Some of this is used in some businesses or companies. So how we first came across this is like one of our mentors, Chris Fishbach, was experiencing and using it a lot at work. And so we kind of adjusted it to use it for our needs for safety. And so if you see FMEA in the future, it's kind of like a distant or close relative of it. So it's both of them are preventative. So we can see like, okay, these are the issues we have. We're going to prevent it for the future. You're also going to see improvements. So the way that we track this, we can see like, okay, we're having less incidents than the year before, blah, 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 blah. You're kind of seeing like, okay, this is how we're going. It's kind of interesting to see like the numerical data and see like, okay, this is how we're doing. All right, any questions so far? We'll move on to reports. So reports are a central part of hazard analysis. You're going to want to make sure that you have some sort of reporting system. So like we talked about earlier, you're going to want to make sure that every time you have an injury where like you're bleeding or it hurts or something like that, that they report it. So these reports help feel like, okay, this is what's happening. This is like our general idea. If people aren't reporting, you're not going to get a full picture. You're not going to get as good as results. So you want to make sure that people are reporting and they're reporting accurately. A very good thing to know is when you're using the spreadsheet that we'll talk about more, is you want to avoid using names. So you'll fill out like okay, it's either a mentor. Looking back, you don't want to be like, okay, little Timmy was super klutzy. Look at all these times he got injured and ha ha ha. You don't want to do that. You want to make sure that you have a positive outlook on the safety thing. Be like, okay, sometimes things happen, but okay, we know like what relationship they had. You're still going to put names on like the individual paper reports because you'll need to track it in case like, okay, we need to know like, okay, when did they get hurt and whatever stuff you need to know for that. You just want to avoid using names because it can get complicated. Hazard reports, so we talked about that a little earlier, so that's where if we find something like dangerous with the environment, like something laying out in the middle of the floor being a tripping hazard or something, fill out a report, figure out why there's stuff laying about like that. Safety violations, so this is their like 3 to 4 strike rule, depending on the severity, whatever your program is. So we do this because it's kind of like, okay, why are they taking this behavior? Do we need different policies? Do we need different training? Was something confusing in instructions that they did something wrong? You just want to make sure that you're being clear. So a near miss that I didn't talk about earlier, but that is pretty much where like you almost get injured. Most of the time, we don't get a lot of near miss reports because people don't realize they need to report it, or they just don't really process the danger that they're in. So most of the time, near misses can be kind of important because most of the reports we do get are like pretty serious. Like they almost cut off some important part of their body, or they almost got hit in the head or something like that. So you want to make sure that you're promoting all of these types of reports so that way you can get the correct data from them. So inspection reports, I kind of talked about where you're going around in your like work environment, make sure it's a safe work environment, everything's in good condition. Because of the sheer amount of them, you don't put all of them into the spreadsheet because there's just too many, because you're doing like 3 a day on build Saturdays. So we only do ones where we find something that needed corrective action or they had to take a corrective action. We do that just because it's better for us organizationally and it cuts down on our work a little bit. You're going to want to start collecting all of your reports in a designated spot. So before we had them in like a very all over the place way, so we want to make sure that we're not. Okay, so the way that we store them now is we go into a accordion folder, and so we have this year, these ones have been inputted, these ones have not been inputted. These ones are, we don't really use those much, but they have been inputted. So you want to make sure that you're being organized. So you can actually be able to do this quite, I'm looking for the right word. It's kind of like you want to make sure you're organized so you can do this with the least amount of stress possible. So what we found is from getting all of our old reports, because we've been having injury reports since like 2014, 2015, is you want to find all of them. Now this can get a bit tricky because that's where you include like other safety captains. Other safety captains might have very different ideas about where to store these things. So you're going to want to make sure that you find as many as possible. For us, a lot of them are actually still with the safety captains. So we had to reach out and make sure, like, hey, do you have any injury reports, hazard reports, stuff like that. You want to make sure that you're being careful with the information that you're given. Because a lot of these injury reports have, like, okay, their first name. We used to have, like, okay, this is your birthday on there. So you want to make sure that you're being really careful with this information and you have a designated spot for them. I suggest that if you are done inputting them and they're from a past year, you put them in a binder and you have a special place for that binder that your mentor or coach is also aware of, so they can keep an eye on it, because you're going to want to protect that information, because no one wants to know, like, okay, you hurt your hand and what date or whatever, because it can be embarrassing sometimes. So we want to make sure that you're keeping it organized and you're keeping it protected. Any questions about reports? Because I'm going to show you how we kind of redid our reports in reaction to this hazard analysis. So how did we rehaul all of our reports? Well, what we kind of looked at was, okay, what's really annoying about our current paperwork? So our old paperwork had a lot of boxes and we didn't use half of them. So we got rid of all the boxes that, like, didn't need to be there. Like, we don't need to know their email. We didn't need to know, like, who witnessed it, because we didn't fill them out. We didn't utilize it. We also streamlined it. So we make it quicker to fill out, and so it's not as time consuming or horrible to fill out the safety paperwork when people do need to report. Something to look at is branding standards. So our team kind of had started it, and by the time we were doing this hazard analysis, another thing stacked onto us was branding standards. So you want to make sure that your branding standards are all in line and whatever with your marketing team, because they might have some certain requirements on how to use a logo, what fonts you're using. So I suggest communication is key, and making sure that you're being consistent with your paperwork. Make them look as similar as possible. So what we changed, we got rid of so many boxes. It was wonderful. It made it so much easier. But we brought back check boxes. We used to have check boxes in, like, 2016, 2017. We got rid of them for some reason with the next safety captain. We brought them back. And so we use those check boxes as categories for our metrics. So those are key things, like, okay, our hands get hurt the most, our fingers or whatever. We can easily use this as, like, okay, we can categorize this as that. We got rid of all that unnecessary info, like birthdays and all that fun stuff about witnesses, and if they took them to the ER. Like, we don't take people to the ER very often. We don't need that on every single report. Like, if we do take someone to the ER, we're going to have a very lengthy report. We're not going to probably fill out this quick version of it. We also have a length of session. So I kind of talked about this. So we're kind of trying to find if there's a correlation between how long you are staying at robotics for a session of time and if you have more injuries. So, like, we're trying to find if, okay, if you have stayed here for like 10 hours, are you going to have more injuries in your 9th and 10th hour, or be more likely to? So it's kind of interesting to see how that will turn out. So if you have a question like, hey, if this has an impact on our injuries, you can kind of see, okay, let's think about this and add it into your reports. You can get some interesting metrics off of it. Corrective action. So before, corrective action was like another sheet, like, okay, this is what we did to fix the problem. This is why, blah, blah, blah. So what we need to do was to make it just so much easier, so we wouldn't have multiple pieces of paper, was we just included corrective action on our original report. So, okay, this is what we did to fix little Timmy's finger. We did first aid, and then we looked at it and be like, okay, we need more training for you, Timmy, with knife handling or something. So you're just kind of keeping it all in one place. So that way in the future, your safety captain does not have to lay out 2 years of paperwork and figure out which reports go with which, because that is painfully long and terrible. So I'm going to show you, this is our old one. See how many boxes there are? Like, okay, phone number, email, witness 1 and 2 and their phone numbers. Like, you can get how this is frustrating and how we didn't fill out half of this most of the time. So then we went to this, which is so much easier. So not only do we not have to worry about misspelling like what happened, we have to just, this is about our top half of it. So we have like our name, what their status is for those metrics, so we can remain anonymous on those things, where it is. So these are like our main places we hang out at Robo, because we all of our departments kind of hang out in different areas, but these are the main places where there are risks to injury. So nature of suspected injury, these are just like a main list of what could happen. So blunt force, bruise, cuts, scrapes, falls, pinching, burning, and then of course, other, because you're going to be in other places, other things are going to happen, you never know. Kind of like parts of the body, most of our injuries are kind of like in that finger, hand area. Some are in that foot or arm. It all really depends on like what it is. You're also going to want some dates, so like, okay, when and why did this happen? How long were you at robotics? So that's that thing we're talking about. Does it have a correlation? So we can go take a quick look-see-loo at the full size. Come on. Yeah. Okay. So this is our old one. So looking down, like there's more, okay, this is our immediate action. You have the signatures. You're going to want to have a report number because report numbers help you organize and connect your anonymous thing to your one with a name and all of the exact details. So you can be like, ah, yes, this is what happened. So this is our old one. It has a lot of boxes and is aggravating. Yeah. Hold on here. Okay, this is our new one. So we talked about this part. So we have the details, corrective action. So that would be immediate and eventual action taken. Who did the corrective action? So did like Susie fix up Tommy's little finger that he hurt? Like you want to make sure like, okay, who did first aid? So that way you can make sure like, okay, did they get proper first aid from someone? You're also going to want to have like a signature from your safety captain and your participant, because your participant acknowledged like it happens and this is correct. Safety captain is pretty much to make sure like I'm aware of the situation. And then report number because organization is crucial. So this is our new report. So this streamlined it a lot and it made it easier to fill out paperwork. I highly recommend it. So you're going to want to have those basic reports figured out and make sure you have them. So you're going to have a variety of logs. So you're going to have a master report log. So this is important because you're going to have a lot of those report ID numbers, and you're going to want to make sure that you're not using report numbers twice. That's something we came along a bunch when we were sorting our old ones, is some of them had 2, and it's one of the things we encounter sometimes still, So sometimes we'll have two and two of like, okay, 2020 report number 6. So if we have two of those, we'll go like 2020 report number 6A and then 2020 report number 6B. That's like the best way we can differentiate without renumbering all of them and being big confusion. So make sure that you're logging it into at least the master log first. So that way you can keep your report numbers all figured out and keep your records somewhat knowledgeable. So the big spreadsheet, your hazard analysis spreadsheet, this can be entered at a slightly later time. I suggest either a weekly or as soon as possible basis. If you wait too long, you might forget like how serious it was, or you might forget it existed, or you might get caught up with going to McDonald's and getting McFlurries and ignoring it. Just do it as soon as possible. If you have a decent amount of time, it's not terrible. You can enter it in like 5 minutes. The worst part about the spreadsheet is probably setting it up if you are unfamiliar with doing spreadsheets. It's a learning experience. You'll figure out a lot from it. We can talk a little bit more about setting it up. So since it was a distant or close relative of FEMEA, we kind of took the template and pretty much adapted it to our safety needs. So if you go to our website, there is a template you can use from FMEA. You might even want to adopt FMEA too, but you're going to want to make sure you take a copy of it before you mess around with it. We can take a look at that later, but pretty much you're going to modify to what your needs are. So it can be used. So this line of thinking like FMEA and hazard analysis, it can be used for other department needs to look at risk and what you need to prevent. So a lot of questions I know will be in this. How do we set this up? How do we start this? So either email me, chat. Otherwise, there's a help desk option if you go to our website too. There's lots of ways to reach out and we'll be happy to help you because we understand how confusing it can be the first time around. So how do I implement this into my team? Ooh, questions. Oh, wonderful. So, not ready for effects yet. So implementation, you're going to want to show it to your team so that way your team is aware of what you are doing. This will help make sure that you're getting your reports. Other parts of your teams might want to be like, I want to steal this idea for my department or something. But it's something really cool and I think your team will appreciate it. You're going to want to make sure you've put a set time frame to import your reports. Ours is as soon as possible because otherwise we forget it and then report numbers get confusing and it gets messy. So I suggest either as soon as possible, daily, or weekly. I like as soon as possible. You're going to want to keep it up to date. That's why you want to import it, input it, because otherwise it gets kind of difficult. And then you can see like all the results, and then you can see if you need to take action. You're going to really want to encourage your team to report because that's where all of the fun stuff comes from. If you're not reporting, then you're not getting your data, you're not getting your metrics, you're not getting what you need to know, you're not getting a whole view of your team. If only your 2 buddies on the team of 40 reports, you're not getting a whole picture of the team. So that's where your safety culture, your leads, and your mentors help you out. You're also going to want to be organized. So you're going to want to have like, okay, this is our set place for all of our done ones. These ones need to go in. These are our blank ones for when an injury happens. You want to make sure that you are in an organized fashion Make sure that your Google Drive or your Team Drive or whatever you have is organized enough so it can be quick and easy for you to do, because then you're more likely to do it. So a weekly update is so you might realize during the course of your week, like, hey, we need to talk about this. There needs to be some more training on this, or we're going to change our policy in this. So you're going to want to make sure that you're updating weekly, like what you find out from this week. So like from little Timmy's knife accident, you want to be like, okay guys, this is some basic training on knife use. So you want to make sure that you're just going over some stuff. It's really useful when you're on team meetings to go over something just very quickly that you realized, hey, we need to go over this. And just a little point out, if you're going to do some training, make sure you record it so that way when new people join like mid-season, you can just show them the video instead of having to present it 20 times to freshmen, because that gets very long. So what are the effects? What comes out of this? So you might do some changes in policies. You might realize, hey, they found some loopholes. Darn, those loopholes. You gotta fix them. So you can have that authoritative language so that way those teenagers don't find all those loopholes. And then you might find like, hey, this policy doesn't fit what we do anymore. We don't do this. We don't use this. We might need to change this so it works for us and we can help reduce injuries. You might do a change in instruction. So sometimes the way mentors or other teammates say, oh, go do this, they might explain it in a terribly unsafe way. So you want to make sure that your instructions are like good safety and promoting good safety practices. Some mentors might need some help with this because they're used to like, hey, this is what I do at my job, or this is what I do at home. But like sometimes those practices are very unsafe. So you're gonna want some mentor help, like making sure that instructions are safe. Every once in a while, I might need to have some new PPE. Some experience I've had with this is we have a person on our team who is very, I don't know how they get hurt. They just keep getting hurt. So we just have them, okay, every time you handle a piece of aluminum and you aren't by certain types of machinery, you need to have gloves. And somehow they still get hurt. But might want to try like, hey, maybe this time you need to have PPE when you're using this tool or doing this process. It might be a little bit of a learning experience, but you want to make sure that it's safe to have that PPE in that area. So you might have some new or adjusted training. So one of our most point-outable things about this is Loctite. So one of the things we discovered from our FMEA is someone put Loctite where they were not supposed to, and it caused a major issue. And so the solution to this was we're going to train these people on how to use Loctite. And so what happened is we actually made an SOP for it, and only certain people were allowed to use Loctite. And then the following year, we added Loctite to our basic training. So even the business people knew, hey, please don't play with this unless you're told to, and please don't put it on these things. So you want to make sure that everyone's pretty knowledgeable on certain topics that might cause issues or injuries for your team. So a new or adjusted SOP, a lot of our new SOPs are kind of like, okay, we got a new equipment. Like, hey, we got a new 3D printer. We're going to do a SOP so that way everyone's using it correctly and safely. Or sometimes we'll realize, hey, this steps that we are taking aren't really working for reducing injuries. Let's see how if we adjust it somehow, that'll work. So these are kind of the actions you can get out of hazard analysis. You might have a completely different one, but it all really depends on your situation, what you're dealing with, what issues you're having, and what risk you want to reduce. Any questions so far? How do you coordinate with safety issues like damage to the robot, damage to the building or tools, or programming inspired accidents? So this is kind of how some of those other reports get involved. So damage to the robot. This is usually attached to a. So that was kind of like what I was talking with the Loctite. That usually comes out of FEMEA, like, hey, they reach out and be like, hey, we need different training. But how you could do it with hazard analysis is you could do a safety violation if it gets to like that serious of a damage of the robot. If it's damage to the building or tools, a lot of the time we will use a I would almost say that's a near miss, because if it damages a robot, you could almost say it could have damaged a human depending on the circumstances. You might even want to create your own report, like damage to capital objects or something. It's all really how you adjust to the team. This might be something like damage to the robot seems like a pretty serious issue that like some of your coaches I think would address some of this. But if you're having behavioral issues like damaging buildings and tools, I would suggest talking to your coach. Safety violations. This is kind of implementation issues of your manual, it seems like. Program inspired incidents. It seems like most of these would be done as either, for us, it either fall into FMEA type stuff. So for you, I would suggest watching our FMEA presentation on our website. They go through how to do robot related stuff. Safety stuff, it's kind of the most I could see you could do is safety violation stuff. And then you could do, okay, we're going to change our policy on how you use our tools, or adjusted training for stuff like that. A change in instruction. Maybe you don't have those certain people who are damaging the building able to access certain tools that would do that. Does that answer your question, Lisa? Ooh, so if you have stuff like it's falling off a workbench and you can't really, I would definitely call that a near miss, because we have some smaller people on our build team that probably would not be able to get out themselves if the robot fell on them. I would definitely classify that as a near miss. Because it could have been like a pretty decent injury if the robot falls on someone. Because the robot can be over 100 pounds, so some people don't have that lifting ability. So you want to make sure that you're, that seems rough. I'd either go with a safety violation if people weren't doing certain things that you have talked about with them. If you have like no precautions for that, I would classify that as a near miss. But it sounds like that was a pretty serious incident that I would either change the instruction, or I would definitely do a change in training. All right, any other questions? So it honestly seems like you need to have a more, so one of the ways that we deal with people mishandling the robot is safety violations. So that way it leads to more training or talking about, like, with the coach, like, hey, you need to do this. Make sure that you're promoting safe things. I would definitely suggest you start a manual and start having more policies. I would recommend talking with with your team about training and stuff like that. I would categorize it as near miss or safety violation, depending on how your manuals and safety expectations are set up. If you have like no setup about like programmers and their robot use, then you need to obviously have a change in policy. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense for you. It all really depends on your situation, on where you are. Like, do you have a manual? Do you not have a manual? How do you set up punishment for people or results of consequences? So usually parents don't get involved unless we ship them off to the ER or EMS is involved, because most of our injuries are just like small cuts, whatever. School is the same way. Your school might have certain policies. So I would, physical injuries, I usually make sure, like, if it's a bigger one, I let my mentor know or my coach know, because some of them require monitoring that person. Like, we had a concussion, so we let most of the mentors and people know, so that way, hey, if this person is having issues, we can make sure that they get the assistance they need. So for serious injuries, I would be like, hey, parents, make sure that you know your kid has had a serious incident, but most of the time you won't have to be concerned with that. If it is a serious thing like a concussion or you have to go to the emergency room, then I would definitely notify at least the mentor or your coach and the parents. You want to make sure that you have a good place in line for your injuries. You're going to want to have an injury contingency or an emergency action plan, as some people call them, for such injuries, of who gets to notify who. All right, so don't forget, you don't want to punish injury reports. You want to promote injury reports and getting all of your injuries reported. So that way you can get all of your needed information. Remain anonymous in your spreadsheets. That way you can, no one's laughing at little Timmy 5 years from now for getting hurt. You want to keep it updated so you can stay organized and make sure that you're having an actual information and it doesn't just end up getting dusty. Put it in a team account or a team drive, so that way no one loses access, because people graduate, people leave, people quit. You want to make sure that you still have access. So you want to make sure that it's in a place where people can access it in the future from your team. Do we have any other questions? Safety stuff can be complicated sometimes. But the main thing to remember is some of your policies might change. So, okay. So, any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to go look at the spreadsheet. So, this might look like a lot of information, but we're going to go through this pretty, we're just going to go over it so that way you understand what's happening here. So you can see we go back to all the way to 2016, where the first found report is. We know there is older reports, we just cannot locate them. This is the importance of sharing and keeping them in the same spot. So you're going to have your years, your report number. So we organize them by like 2016.04. So that way we can keep track of what year it happened in as well. What report type? So you can see like we have inspections, safety violations. So this is where we kind of get those, okay, the incident with the robot happened because someone wasn't following the expectations. We had a lot more safety violation reports back in 2016, as you can see. But as we move into like 2020, we have more just injury reports and less safety violations. So relationship to the team, you can see that that's our student and mentor thing. This is where you maintain your anonymous, so you don't have a specific, oh, it was this person, it was little Susie or whatever. You want to make sure that that anonymous. You're going to have your location. You'll notice that most of ours happen in the shop. That's where your checkboxes come in, because this is your categories or your metrics. So we have the date, what time it was, how long they're at Robo. So you notice like in 2016, they didn't keep track of it. So they just didn't have it. So we put NA as not applicable. So that way it doesn't affect as like, oh, we don't know, or this is what time. So like going into like 2020, we have like, okay, this person was like here for 3 hours before they got injured. It helps us give a sense of like, when do we need to suggest people take a break. So equipment, so you can be like, okay, this is what they got hurt on, like the saws, a hand tool, was it a mill? So you can kind of classify the injury. What body part? That's once again those check boxes. You're going to have a few that are others that are fitting in, so you might get a little angry red thing, but that's okay. It'll get over it eventually. So this is one of the things I want to talk about, is this risk matrix. So how often does it occur? So unlikely, likely, seldom, that type of thing. So we kind of talked a lot about what kind of wording do we want to use. So that way we can like classify, okay, this is how often it happens, how much is too much, and whatever. The same thing happened with severity. So we went with no injury, marginal injury, minor injury, major injury, or EMS involved. Anything with major or EMS involved, I would suggest, Lisa, that you get parents involved, because parents are going to want to know if their child is being taken by EMS, and they're probably going to want to meet them at the hospital type of stuff. So you want to keep that in mind. Response rank, this is kind of like, okay, are we just going to be like, hey, don't do this next time? Are we going to change our policy? Are we going to redo our training for the team or that person? Are we going to give them a safety violation, or are we going to suspend them from the team? We have had some where we tell them, okay, you're not going to be at the team for a while until you can manage yourself a little bit better. But so then they multiply together and you get a risk priority number. And so see how all of these are low? We'll pop over to our risk matrix here. So they're all following into this like green happy area where it's not a huge deal. Where you get into this yellow and red area, it means you have a serious problem and you need to sorry. So we are at time, so if you have any questions, feel free to email me on that email. Do we have any last minute questions? Nope. All right. Well, thank you to listening at my presentation. This is just kind of what the end looks like. Short-term actions, what lessons you learned, what long-term hazard. So this is kind of where you talk to your weekly meetings, who's responsible for that, and if it's completed or not. So you can do this on a spreadsheet like Google, or I'm sure you could do it on Excel, but there's a template on our website for FMEA. Any other questions? Last minute comments or anything? All right. Thank you guys.